"Show me your papers. If not, please leave the hotel immediately." Those were the cold words of a white policewoman in the lobby of a 5-star hotel amidst dozens of curious glances. No one expected that the polite couple, who were just celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary, would become the target of a public background check just because they were black. There was no violation, no report, only prejudice and abusive power. But that shameful moment opened up something bigger than anyone could have imagined, because the man she insulted was not ordinary, and they, the seemingly silent people, sparked an unprecedented wave of justice. This is not just a case of racism. This is a turning point. If you believe that dignity is something that cannot be taken away, click. Subscribe to the channel now. This story will make you rethink the way we look at others and ourselves. The autumn wind swept across the hills like someone's hand gently covering memories when the black SUV pulled up in front of the Ashton Heights Hotel. The late afternoon sunlight cast a golden glow over the ancient stone facade, making the building seem frozen in time. It wasn't just a beautiful sight. It seemed designed for them. Jeremiah and Camille Drake. He stepped forward, walking slowly, as if he were entering a formal ceremony. At 62, Jeremiah still carried himself like a dignified leader, a man who had served 3 administrations and sat in on high-level negotiations over land, resources, and human rights. But in this moment, he was just a husband, embarking on a short journey to honor the long journey of a lifetime. Camille followed, her steps steady but light. The moss-green dress hugged her slim figure, and her silver earrings reflected the sunlight like the last stars before sunset. At 60, she still had the air of a woman who had guided thousands of students through the most difficult years of a segregated education system. But today, she had not come to fight. Today, she had come to remember love, and to be loved simply. "I've been imagining this moment for the past 3 months," Camille said softly, as the car door closed behind her. Jeremiah smiled, taking her hand. "I've been imagining it for 40 years. They didn't need to mention the number. 40 years of marriage, 3 grown children, hundreds of sleepless nights, and thousands of stormy handshakes. The look they shared was enough to last a lifetime. Ashton Heights appeared in slow motion. The mahogany library with its antique gold lamps, the curving staircase with its red velvet carpet, the scent of black tea and pine in the air. They hadn't come here to be admired. They just wanted to exist, like any couple seeking old warmth. Jeremiah had discovered the hotel through a travel article while waiting for a delayed flight. One sentence in the article made him pause. Ashton Heights is not a place to run away from. It's a place to return to. And he knew right away, this was a place worthy of a 40th anniversary. The front desk was framed by 2 pots of red geraniums. A young man in a navy suit, his brown hair neatly combed, looked up as they approached. His smile was professional, proper. But Camille's eyes were sharp. Just the slightest hesitation, just enough of a look to make her feel unwelcome. "Hello, welcome to Ashton Heights," he said, his voice friendly enough. "Your name?" "Jeremiah Drake, and my wife Camille," he said, handing over the reservation. The receptionist bowed his head, tapping away at his computer. A pause. A glance. Another tap. "The Marigold, top floor. Great view, especially at sunset." "Perfect," Camille smiled, though she still felt the sting of that look. The elevator carried them smoothly to the 5th floor. Jeremiah held her hand, saying nothing. He knew what she felt. They had been to many places, met all kinds of people, from respectful glances to skeptical frowns, and they had learned to read situations before they spoke. The Marigold was a love song of oak, red velvet, and marble. The 4-poster bed was covered with a white sheet, and the balcony overlooked the valley where the last rays of sunlight were caressing the distant trees. Camille stepped outside, and took a deep breath. The air was cool and fresh, like a poem without rhyme. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "What?" "The sound of peace." Jeremiah didn't answer. He just walked over to her, placing his hand on her shoulder. They both looked out at the horizon, where the sun was slowly setting, as if they were also resting after a long day. Then they dressed and went down to dinner. Jeremiah adjusted his gold cufflinks, a gift Camille had given him on their 10th wedding anniversary. Camille stood before the mirror, wearing a pearl necklace, one for each year they had been together. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her eyes were brighter than ever. "Do you know when I first saw you?" she asked, her lips curling. "That time at student council," he laughed. "No, before that. When you were reading the student union rules out loud on campus, your voice was stiff as a robot, but your eyes were shining." Jeremiah laughed. "Really? And you thought you were cool?" "Cool and awkward," she nodded. "And I loved you from that moment on." They walked down to the dining room, 2 quiet lights in an elegant space. A few eyes glanced back, some smiled, some silently turned away. But they didn't care. They had been through it too many times. What they were looking for now wasn't acceptance from strangers, but completeness in each other. Little did they know that one seemingly peaceful night was about to bring them to the brink of a historic collision, where honor, past, and self-respect would be tested to the utmost. The Montrose restaurant is located in the innermost part of the Ashton Heights Hotel, an oak space, the crystal lights yellow like hidden fires in the autumn afternoon. The sound of knives and forks, the clinking of glasses, the barely audible chatter mixed with the hazy jazz music, creating an elegant atmosphere that could make anyone feel like they were living in an oil painting. Camille entered the space with a steady gait, her eyes scanning the room, not looking for anything in particular, just the reflex of someone who had lived for many years under scrutiny. She linked arms with Jeremiah. His ash-gray suit was perfectly tailored, his manner effortless. Although they did not need to be noticed, their presence changed the rhythm of the room, very slightly, like a simultaneous inhale, like eyes meeting and then moving away. "Are we the first to arrive?" Camille asked softly. "Perhaps," Jeremiah replied, his eyes still on the maitre d' as he approached. The man, 60s, gray hair, a crisp tuxedo, looked at them for a moment, then glanced down at the reservation list. A pause. Camille saw it. Jeremiah saw it too. "Drake." "Ah, yes," he nodded after a slow beat. "Please, your table is by the fireplace." Camille smiled her thanks, but the smile was incomplete. It touched something in her chest. An old memory. That year, she had been invited to speak at a national education conference. When she entered the room, the organizers asked her to go around to the waiter's door. They didn't believe a woman of color could be the keynote speaker. Tonight, no one spoke, but the eyes were the same. Table 8 was the best in the room, near the fireplace, just secluded enough to be romantic. But as they sat down, Camille felt the gazes creeping in, from left, from right, from the back of her neck. Not long after, a middle-aged couple sat down at the table opposite. The man wore a brown blazer, his hair was thinning, his eyes were sharp as metal. The woman with him, wearing a string of white pearls that stood out against her black dress, glanced Camille up and down unabashedly. "Did you see anything?" Camille asked softly, her hand resting on the silver spoon as if searching for something to hold. "I saw it," Jeremiah replied, trying to keep his voice light. "But let's not jump to conclusions." "That's not a conclusion," she said, her eyes looking straight ahead. "This is what I've seen all my life." A waitress appeared. She was blonde, in her early 20s, and didn't smile, didn't say hello. She just set the menu down on the table like a bill. Then she left as quickly as the wind blew. "Maybe she's tired," Jeremiah said, trying to salvage the atmosphere. "Maybe," Camille replied, but her eyes were on the full glass of water that was placed slightly to one side. A small detail. but enough for her to understand that invisibility had begun to take hold. Jeremiah flipped through the menu. "What are we having for our 40th anniversary tonight?" Camille smiled, a paper-thin smile. "Choose. I'm not hungry anymore." When the food arrived, lemon cod with butter and lemon for Jeremiah, honey-roasted duck for Camille, the presentation was perfect. But Camille looked at the plate as if it were an alien object. Her sense of taste had, it seemed, been taken away by someone since she'd walked through the door of this restaurant. "Why is it still like this?" she asked, very quietly, as if to herself. Jeremiah looked around. The tables around her were filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses. But at their table, no one came to greet them. No one smiled. No one asked if the food was to their liking. They were like a missing paragraph in the novel of the night. When Camille looked up, she met the eyes of the woman with the pearls. She smiled. Not a friendly smile, but the polite, fake smile that often accompanied sarcasm. "Do you remember the first time I took you home?" Camille whispered, as if to save the memory. Jeremiah nodded. "I do. My mother made a pear pie, and the neighbors stared out the window for 3 hours." They both laughed softly. But then Camille added, without laughing this time, "I thought, after 40 years we wouldn't have to go through that anymore. But it turns out it was. No words. Just a look." Jeremiah squeezed her hand under the table. Not to comfort, but to hold on to something that was breaking. Dessert never came. Camille wasn't hungry. There was just something inside her that was breaking into tiny pieces. Not enough to make her cry, but enough to keep her silent all the way back to her room. As they rose from this table, the man in the brown blazer whispered something in his wife's ear. Camille caught 2 words. Privilege. She didn't turn, but her chest tightened. In the elevator, Camille leaned against the metal railing. "I hate this feeling," she said, her voice choking. "Like I'm a thief in a house that doesn't belong to me." Jeremiah looked at her, his voice breaking into a sigh. "I paid for every brick in my path. You stole nothing." Camille nodded, but didn't answer. She didn't need to be comforted. She needed to be understood. Camille stepped out onto the balcony as the clock struck 11. The distant city shimmered like a galaxy in the valley. A cool breeze blew through her hair, but it did nothing to ease the chill that had seeped into her heart. "Do you remember the first time we went to Beaulieu?" she asked, feeling Jeremiah's footsteps approaching. "Yes," he said, his arm gently around her shoulders. "The manager made me show him my membership card, even though we had a reservation. And when I showed him my card, he stared at it like he couldn't believe it was real." "Do you remember what we had for dinner that night?" Camille asked, her voice light. Jeremiah chuckled. "Not the food, just that you didn't touch your knife or fork once." "I wasn't hungry, I just wanted to leave, like tonight." Camille turned to look at him, her eyes glistening with tears. "I'm tired, Jeremiah. Tired of always proving that I'm harmless, that I'm worthy of being here." Jeremiah lifted her hand, placing a gentle kiss on the wrinkled back of it. "You don't have to prove anything. Not to me. Not to anyone." Camille nodded. But inside her, there was still a nameless void. A void that no words of encouragement could fill. Only change, real change, could heal. That night, they slept without really sleeping. And when Camille woke in the middle of the night, she turned to look at the husband who had been with her through so many storms. She whispered, as if to remind herself, "Tomorrow, if anything happens, I won't be silent anymore." The morning at the Ashton Heights Hotel began with warm sunlight filtering through the white curtains, casting shadows on the wooden floor like a peaceful promise. Camille woke with a strange feeling. Not fear, but something insidious. An emotional hangover from the night before. Jeremiah was up first, making coffee in an antique French press on the table by the window. "You make it just the way I like it," he said, setting the cup down in front of her, smiling softly, as he had every morning for the past 40 years. Camille took the cup, her hand still shaking slightly. "Thank you." She took a sip and stared silently out the window. In the distance, the Blue Ridge Hills rose in the sunlight like endless blue waves, peaceful, beautiful and contradictory, not safe. I think we should stick to the same schedule, Jeremiah said softly. Massage at 11, then lunch in the garden. Camille nodded, not saying anything. The schedule sounded perfect, but she knew, and Jeremiah knew, that the morning would not pass as smoothly as planned. When they stepped into the elevator, they were both dressed in elegant formality. Camille wore a pale blue blouse and white slacks, a small pearl necklace around her wrist. Jeremiah had chosen a light, sand-colored linen jacket and polished brown leather shoes. Everything was neat, like a protective armor. "There's something in your eyes," Jeremiah said as the elevator doors closed. "Wariness," Camille said without hesitation. "I see it," he said. "Me too." They stepped out into the main hallway, where the reception desk was to their left. The light from the ceiling lights reflected off the marble floors, giving everything a formal, orderly look. Angela, the young receptionist from yesterday, was still standing at the desk. When she saw them, she smiled genuinely. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Drake," she greeted, her eyes warm. "Good morning," Camille replied, smiling genuinely for the first time this morning. They were about to ask about the shuttle to the gardens when a familiar voice rang out behind them. Cold, sharp, and unmistakable. "Where are you going this morning?" Camille turned. Jeremiah was half a step in front of his wife. It was her, the uniformed woman who had first appeared last night in the dining room. This time, not in a leather jacket, but in a full county sheriff's uniform. On her chest was a glittering badge, Deputy Jessica Leair. Leair stood only a few feet away, her arms crossed, her eyes as sharp as metal. "I was told there might be an unregistered couple using the hotel," she said, her voice even, but loud enough for those nearby to hear. Angela raised her head. "It wasn't them," she said clearly. "I checked them in myself Friday afternoon. They were in the Marigold suite." Leair didn't look at Angela. Her gaze was still fixed on Camille and Jeremiah. "I need to verify your identities and see proof of your reservation." Jeremiah took a half step forward, his gaze calm but firm. "Are you suspecting us just because someone feels uncomfortable?" "We've received complaints that 2 people are wandering around the staff area and behaving unusually," Leair replied, unfazed. "Unusual?" Camille asked. "What specifically?" "I'm not obligated to reveal the source of the report," she replied. Camille turned to Angela, her voice still calm. "Last night after dinner, my husband and I went straight to our room, right?" Angela nodded immediately. "I remember. They went straight to our room. I even said goodnight." At this point, several guests sitting near the lobby began to look back. A woman with a cup of coffee in her hand whispered to her friend. An older couple paused at the word identity verification. Jeremiah kept his voice calm, but not low. "We don't have to leave the hotel to prove our innocence. And you have no right to threaten us in the lobby in front of everyone just because you suspect." Leair stiffened. His calmness, combined with the way Camille stood straight, her eyes unblinking, seemed to make her lose the initiative. Camille continued, her voice ringing like a bell this time. "This is harassment. This is prejudice, and I will not be silent." The crowd began to murmur. Someone pulled out a phone. A hotel employee whispered something into a walkie-talkie. Angela stepped out from behind the counter and stood next to the Drakes. "I've seen enough," she said, her eyes fixed on Leair. "They're not doing anything wrong. If you continue, I'll call the manager in." Leair glanced around. She knew she was being filmed, being watched. But she said firmly, "I'll call in backup. We need to make sure no one is threatening the safety of this place." Camille smiled faintly. "No one here is threatened, except my pride." The room fell silent for a beat. "And if you need verification," Jeremiah added, "we have all the paperwork. But you're not going to drag us out like thieves in the night." At that moment, Eli, the hotel manager, appeared. His face was pale, clearly having received an urgent message. "What's going on here?" he asked, voice low and worried. Angela stepped forward. "Deputy Leair is asking for the guests to be removed from the lobby for identity verification, even though I've already confirmed them." Eli looked at Leair, then at the couple who were still standing straight, unflinching. He sighed. "They are VIPs," he said. "We have checked all the information. There are no violations. Leair was still standing, but her eyes had lost their certainty. Something was beginning to waver. Camille squeezed her husband's hand. She did not need to win. She just needed to see the truth not buried under false authority. To be continued. No one spoke for several seconds. Camille could feel the change in the atmosphere, as if a storm was being held behind the glass wall, waiting for the wrong move to strike. She looked straight into Jessica Leair's eyes. Cold, calculating, but now with a flicker of confusion. Just a flicker, but enough for Camille to know she'd hit a sore spot. "You know what's really threatening the safety here?" Camille asked, her voice even. "It's the abuse of authority to justify personal prejudice." Eli cleared his throat, stepping between them like a screen. "I'd like everyone to calm down. Deputy Leair, if you need to verify, you can do it in the administration room with me and the hotel attorney present." Angela took another step forward, right next to Camille, her eyes never leaving Leair. "Or if necessary, I'm willing to testify before the police." The silence stretched. Leair didn't answer. She looked at Camille, then Jeremiah, then at the crowd, which was starting to raise its cameras higher. The words TikTok, live stream, hat profiling, already ringing in the air. Jeremiah squeezed his wife's hand. Camille held her head high, standing like a steel pillar in the heart of a storm. Leair took a step back, then said, "I'll turn the file over to my superiors." The words sounded like a pressure release valve, but they also signaled that something was clear. She was no longer in control. Camille watched the uniformed woman walk out of the hall, her back straight, but heavy with defeat. As the door closed behind Leair, Angela whispered, "You did the right thing. Not everyone dares to do that." Camille smiled slightly, but inside her, another emotion was stirring. Not victory, but foreboding. She knew this was just the beginning of something much bigger. Eli turned, bowing to the couple. "I'm truly sorry for everything that happened." Jeremiah replied in a warm but firm voice, "It's not the words that make things right. It's the actions." Eli nodded, then walked away, his shoulders heavy. Camille turned to Jeremiah. "You think this is where it ends?" Jeremiah shook his head, his eyes deep. "No, but this time someone is watching." She nodded slowly, her hand tightening on the strap of her bag. Yes, someone was watching, and this time they wouldn't be silent. The lobby of the Ashton Heights Hotel had never been as crowded as it was that morning. Every step seemed to echo through the luxurious space, not because of the sound, but because of the eyes. Camille and Jeremiah sat in a quiet corner near the coffee bar, their espressos not touching their lips. They didn't talk. They just watched the people pass by, eyes furtively glancing their way, and then quickly looking away. On social media, a short video of their encounter with Deputy Leair last night had begun to circulate. A guest in the lobby, name unknown, had recorded the entire moment Camille stepped forward to confront them, her eyes unwavering, her voice low but commanding. The person who posted the clip had written just one line. "Whoever thinks power cannot be challenged, look at this woman." The hashtag Ashton Incident began to appear. Then #Camille Drake. Then, "Say my name." Jeremiah glanced at his phone. "The video has been viewed over 1 million times." Camille said nothing. She just nodded, her eyes distant. Angela came running from the front desk. "There are people from the local media waiting in the lobby, and Eli is trying to stop them from coming in." "Don't stop them," Camille said softly. "If the truth has started to speak, we can't silence it again." Angela hesitated, then nodded. "I'll tell Eli." As Angela left, a waiter brought them their morning coffee. The waiter, for the first time all vacation, smiled, his eyes sincere. I want to apologize for last night. I wasn't on duty, but I heard. I'm a teacher's son. My mother used to tell stories like that, and I think I need to say this. Thank you for not backing out." Jeremiah nodded. "Thank you for speaking up." As the waiter left, Camille sighed. "Things are changing, but no one knows where they're going." A short time later, a group of people appeared in the lobby. They were dressed casually, mostly hotel guests. But Camille noticed something different. The look in their eyes. No longer curious. Approving. A silver-haired woman approached. "I lived through 1968, she said, her voice clear. "But I've never seen anyone stand like you did last night. We're here, if you need anything." A younger man chimed in. "I'm live streaming if you want to talk." Camille glanced at Jeremiah. He nodded. She turned back to face the phone. "We're here to celebrate our 40th anniversary, she began, her voice calm. "Not to be the center of attention. But sometimes you don't choose the moment chooses you." The lobby fell silent. Even the hotel staff stopped to listen. Jeremiah stood beside his wife, holding her hand. "We don't want privileges," Camille continued. "We just want peace. But if that peace comes at the cost of silence in the face of injustice, then we refuse to pay." The live video exploded online. Comments poured in like a tidal wave. "Speak truth. Unshakable. Where do I sign?" At that moment, the large door opened. Leair returned. The arrogance in her stride was gone, but the challenge in her eyes was still there. The entire lobby turned to look at her. Camille squeezed Jeremiah's hand. "It's time for the wind to change," she whispered. The air in the lobby seemed to freeze as Jessica Leair entered. Her uniform was as neat as if it had been ironed, but her eyes were no longer as sharp as before. It held something else. Anticipation, confusion, and fury that didn't know where to turn. Camille stood, unhurried. Jeremiah followed close behind. She needed no push. The storm this time came not from the screaming, but from the presence of those who chose not to back down. "Deputy Leair," Camille said first. "I hope you're not here to continue an investigation you know is unfounded." Leair hesitated. Eyes from all directions were like searchlights aimed at her. In a moment, Camille realized that the opponent before her was not just a representative of power, but someone who could not control it. "I was told to see this hotel manager," she said, avoiding Camille's gaze. Eli stepped forward, his face expressionless. "My office is still available, but this time I will record the entire conversation." Angela called out from the front desk, "And I'll be there, as a witness." Leair didn't answer, but nodded slightly. As she turned to leave, Camille called out, "Don't forget to bring the truth. It might help you this time." No one laughed. No one applauded. But everyone understood. The balance was shifting. As the group disappeared behind the administrative doors, Camille turned back to the lobby. A middle-aged white woman approached, holding out a business card. "I'm a civil rights attorney. If you need me, I'm here." A young brown man with a camera backpack said softly, "I'm a journalism student. I recorded the whole thing. Not just the original footage, but also the witness statements." Jeremiah took the phone number. Camille put her hand on the student's shoulder and said softly, "Thanks for not filming." The lobby felt like a conference room. People whispered to each other, shared posts, recounted the events as if they had all become unscheduled witnesses. In a corner of the hall, an old woman pulled a handkerchief from her pocket and gently wiped the corners of her eyes. "It's been a long time," she said quietly, "since someone stood up like this and made me remember that I used to speak up." Camille sat down on a nearby bench. Jeremiah was silent beside her. No one needed to say anything. They were all waiting for the door to open, waiting for a sign that something was really changing. And then the door opened. It wasn't Leair who stepped out first, but a strange man in a light gray suit, tall, thin, with a metal name tag. Federal Internal Affairs. Camille looked at Jeremiah. He nodded, his eyes hard. This was the part they had expected. The truth wouldn't stop here. And neither did they. The man stepped forward, his voice clear. "I am the Federal Counsel for Civil Rights Complaints. We have received an official report and will be investigating the abuse and discrimination that occurred at the Ashton Heights Hotel." The lobby held its breath. "We thank Camille Drake and Jeremiah Drake for their full testimony, with evidence and witnesses," he continued. "And we encourage anyone who witnessed what happened last night or this morning to come forward." A murmur. Then a hand went up. The waiter from that morning. Then another. The customer from last night's restaurant. And another. No one gave orders. No one forced them. But everyone understood. The truth must be defended by numbers. Jeremiah turned to Camille, his voice low and steady. This is no longer about me. Camille smiled faintly. And it never was. That afternoon, the sky over Asheville had turned gray, not from clouds, but from the weight of a day approaching truth. The atmosphere inside the Ashton Heights Hotel, where it had all begun, had shifted to a different state. No longer a mere resort, but a silent battlefield of justice and confrontation. Camille and Jeremiah Drake had returned to the Marigold suite. In Camille's hands was a thick file, handed to her by the federal counsel, papers containing information that should have been opened years ago. She had 3 complaints of racial discrimination in the 2 years she worked for Franklin County, the counsel had said, handing them copies of internal documents. And 2 of them were resolved internally, not released to the public, Jeremiah repeated, his voice heavy. Camille flipped through the documents, reading each line with unblinking eyes. There's no doubt about it. Leair is a symbol of a system that's used to covering for itself. In the yellow light of the living room, she looked like a natural prosecutor, her face no longer carrying the tiredness of someone who's been wronged, but the intense concentration of someone who's ready to restore order. That same evening, a reporter from the local station WNCA knocked on the door. I understand you were directly involved in this morning's incident. We've received video, testimony, and now documents. Would you like to speak? Camille looked at Jeremiah. He just nodded. There was no hesitation. In the living room of the suite, the lights were dimmed, the cameras were set up. Camille sat facing the lens. No script, no reading. She just spoke. And as she spoke, she let each word sink in like a stone set into the foundation of truth. This is not an attack on an individual, she began. This is a wake-up call to a system that has long used power as a weapon of oppression, not protection. The video of the interview was only 11 minutes long. But less than 2 hours after it aired, it had gone viral across social media. On Twitter, the phrase "Camille speaks" began to be used as a movement. A law professor at Howard University wrote, "The calmness in Ms. Drake's voice is worth 1,000 indictments." That same night, the editor of a major Atlanta newspaper contacted Camille to verify the information. They had evidence that Leair had been protected from action by an internal protection network, something that could spark not just a backlash, but a state investigation. Angela, the receptionist, also received an interview request. In a live stream hosted by a group of civil rights lawyers, she recounted the morning in detail, her voice shaking but firm. "I didn't do anything special," she said. "I just can't stay silent when people are being humiliated." The hotel, though it has yet to make a formal announcement, has begun to show signs of change. It has posted signs announcing that all employees will undergo retraining on guest rights and racial awareness. But for Camille, that's just a small step. The truth has escaped the stone walls of this place, and it can no longer be suppressed. From his room, Jeremiah fielded calls from former government colleagues. Many called to offer support, but others were concerned. "You should be careful. This could drag in people we don't want to mess with." "That's why I can't stay silent," he said. At the end of the day, Camille sat by the window, gazing thoughtfully at the city lights. Jeremiah put his hand on her shoulder, and for a moment he was silent. "Tomorrow will be different," he said. "Yes," Camille replied, "because today we didn't hide." The next morning, the mood was different. Not just inside the hotel, but outside. In front of the front door of Ashton Heights, a small group of activists and locals had gathered, carrying a simple but powerful banner. Dignity is not optional. There were no chants, no flashy banners, just a silent presence, and by their silence, they made others listen. Camille and Jeremiah walked down the hall, preparing to leave the hotel. They didn't say much, but everyone could sense it, They weren't retreating. They were advancing. Step by step, amid respectful glances, Angela handed Camille a file. "They're from the state attorney's office. They want to get access to both of you to help with the hearing." Jeremiah took it. "Thanks, for yesterday and today." Angela hesitated. "I used to think that telling the truth would make me a target. But now I understand. The truth doesn't make you weak. It makes you clear." Camille looked at this young woman. "And clarity is what changes the world." As they walked toward the door, a television reporter tried to approach, but Jeremiah raised his hand, not to reject, but to delay. "The story isn't over," he said. "But when it's over, we'll be the ones to tell." The car drove away from the hotel, down a leafy, sun-dappled street. In the car, Camille held her phone, looking at a text message from a woman in New York. "I've never dared to tell the story of how I was rejected from a fancy restaurant. But thanks to you, I will. And I'll sign my name." She nodded slightly. "They're starting to talk. And this time," Jeremiah added, "no one will be forced to keep quiet." As the car turned onto the freeway, the horizon opened up. Camille closed her eyes for a moment. She didn't feel tired, though she knew the road ahead would not be easy. She knew the only thing more important than winning was not allowing the truth to be left behind. 3 days after the Ashton Heights Hotel incident, the story of Camille and Jeremiah Drake officially broke out of Asheville. Like a fire in dry hay, the national media was ablaze with the event, not just because of the viral videos, but because of something deeper: the resonance in the hearts of millions who had been silent. On CNN, a special news program titled "When Dignity Meets Power" aired in prime time. In the opening montage, an image of Camille standing across from Deputy Leair in the hotel lobby was intercut with the narration. An ordinary vacation, an extraordinary look, and the standard resistance that is making America look at itself. NBC, MSNBC, NPR, even independent YouTube platforms all reported the story. But what everyone listened to wasn't the screams, it was the quiet steadiness. "Camille Drake doesn't break the order," wrote a writer from The Atlantic. "She exposes the false order we've been living in." Jeremiah sat in the small living room of his youngest son's house, where they'd been staying since leaving the hotel. He turned on the morning news. Camille's speech from the day before flashed before him. She wasn't trying to impress, but she couldn't take her eyes off it. Camille was in the corner, her phone buzzing. Messages from former teachers, former students, people she'd never met. One line of text made her freeze. "I'm Trayvon's mother. Thank you for keeping dignity for those who didn't get a chance to do so." She clutched the phone tightly, tears not falling but her eyes shining from within. At that moment, Angela called. "Camille, the hotel officially fired Leair this morning. I got an internal email. They're also bringing in an outside organization to re-examine all the customer complaints." Camille mused. "Change starts small, right?" Angela replied, her voice shaking. "But this time it's you. I know that." Meanwhile, at the State House, a group of lawmakers began drafting a policy proposal called the Drake Clause, a provision that would protect privacy and prevent discrimination in lodging. The name wasn't Camille's idea, nor was it meant to honor. It was meant to be a reminder. No one walks into a public place with history on their shoulders without expecting to be greeted as a human being, the proposal's lead line read. Conservative media was divided. Some articles questioned whether Camille was using her power to exert pressure. The words narcissistic, police just doing their job, resurfaced, trying to hold on to an old rhythm. Camille didn't respond. Jeremiah just smiled as he read the headlines. If they have to say things like that to justify it, then we scared them. That evening, Camille and Jeremiah appeared together for the first time in a live television interview. "Do you think you created the divide?" the host asked. Camille replied with a calm smile. "No, we didn't create the rift. We just shined a light on the rift that was already there." The audience stood up and applauded. The interview ended, but the echoes did not stop. Millions of people shared the video, accompanied by a sentence. This isn't just about her. This is about all of us. The next morning, Camille opened her email inbox to find more than 600 unread emails. Most came from complete strangers: a nurse in Minneapolis, a pastor from Mississippi, a 14-year-old boy in Oregon who wrote, "You make me think that growing up doesn't mean being quiet." Another email came from the Justice Department, a formal invitation for Camille to join a newly formed community advisory group that would deal with discrimination in public service. Jeremiah read it aloud. They say your voice is something you can't teach. You can only listen to. But amid the storm, Camille kept her life simple. She declined invitations to talk shows, didn't attend honors dinners. "I'm not looking for a stage," she told Jeremiah. "I'm looking for a conscience, but the power of the right action at the right time is something no one can control." A documentary producer from New York flew all the way to Raleigh, sat on a 2-hour wait for a meeting. Camille said one thing: "I don't want to be the main character. Tell the stories of people no one remembers." And then strange things started happening. Hotels in the area updated their check-in and check-out procedures. They issued anti-discrimination pledges, sent staff through retraining. A popular travel app added a no discrimination tag as a rating standard. They didn't thank Camille, but they changed. Jeremiah, who is usually reserved, also started getting invited to speak at conferences. In one speech at a university, he recounted just one moment. "When I saw my wife standing tall, her eyes unwavering, in a hall of skeptical eyes, and I knew America would change, not by the shouts, but by those who stood still." The audience applauded, not because he spoke well, but because he told the truth. Camille and Jeremiah went home late one afternoon. On the bench outside the door, their neighbors had left a bouquet and a small note. "Thank you for saying what we felt, but didn't know how to name." Camille smiled softly. "The truth doesn't need to be shouted," she whispered. "Just stand." Monday morning, Raleigh was unusually clear. The air was a distillation of the silence after a storm, a silence not of peace, but of millions of eyes holding their breaths as they watched what was to come. Camille and Jeremiah stood on the steps of the North Carolina Civil Rights Commission. The media had gathered early. Cameras were lined up, reporters whispered into microphones, and spectators gathered around the perimeter. But no one made a sound. They were waiting for something that couldn't be defined in words, only felt. A turning point. And today, that turning point took the form of a public hearing. "Are you ready?" Jeremiah asked, his eyes fixed on the wide glass doors that reflected the city behind them. Camille adjusted her indigo coat, her hands clasping the folder. "Not ready," she said, "but time." They walked in. In the great hall, hundreds of seats were filled. On the left were congressmen, lawyers, civil rights officials. On the right were citizens, students, elders, children, every class, every color. They had not come out of curiosity. They had come out of hope. And in the middle, at the witness table, sat Camille. The presiding judge nodded. "Ms. Drake, we thank you for coming. Please begin." Camille began, her voice low, but clear as water from a deep well. "I am not here to criticize a man. I am here to expose a system that has allowed him to go unchallenged for so long." All was silent. Only the sound of a tape recorder played. My husband and I, on what seemed like a simple vacation, were asked to identify ourselves in the middle of a hotel lobby on a suspicion that had no basis, other than that we were black in an overly white space. She paused, not to catch his breath, but to let each word sink in. "And what pains me most is that this is not uncommon. It's just not recorded." An elderly senator rested his chin on his hand. A student in the back row pulled out his phone to record. Not to share, but to remember. "We don't want anyone to lose their jobs. But if no one loses their job, then things will continue." Camille's testimony lasted 17 minutes. There was no dramatic expression, no rehearsed rhetoric. just the truth. Raw and beautiful because it was told with courage. When she sat down, the room fell silent for a few more seconds, then erupted into applause. Scattered at first, then louder, like a silent declaration. Then came the rebuttal. Deputy Leair was called into the room. For the first time since the incident, she was sitting across from not the person she had suspected, but the system that had protected her. She bowed her head, her voice soft. "I was just following protocol. I was informed of a suspicious situation." A committee member asked bluntly, "Who informed? Is there evidence? Who in the hotel sent the emergency signal?" Leair hesitated. "No official report. Just a word in passing." "So you acted on intuition? An intuition that picked out a black couple from dozens of white couples?" Leair was silent. Her eyes wavered. No one booed. No one insulted. But the atmosphere seemed to condense into a pressure that no deceitful heart could bear. Camille did not look directly at Leair. She looked ahead, where the younger people were watching her. People who would learn that true strength comes from calm, not shouting. The presiding judge closed the hearing. "We will have our conclusions in 3 days. But whatever our conclusions, what happened, and how Ms. Drake dealt with it, will set the standard for all future public examinations." The courtroom rose to send Camille and Jeremiah off with nods. There was no loud applause, just looks of gratitude, as if someone had cleared a path that should have been clear in the first place. They stepped outside, where the rising sun beat down on the stone steps. Jeremiah lowered his sunglasses. Camille squinted. "Facing the dark," she said, "is familiar, but facing the light, it takes more courage." And she did. That afternoon, excerpts from the hearing went viral. Social media platforms like TikTok and Instagram were filled with clips of Camille's testimony, accompanied by simple captions. "Dare to stand up. Don't back down. Calm is power." A group of law students from Morehouse College held an after-school seminar on campus, replaying the entire hearing. "This is a vivid example of social law, where justice doesn't wait for a verdict, but begins with individual action," the professor said. Mainstream media reported the news and commented. A New York Times editorial read, "In an age where noise overwhelms reason, Camille Drake chooses a directed silence. And by doing so, she makes it impossible for us to look away." That same day, the district attorney's office announced that a formal investigation into Deputy Leair's employment history and cases would be reopened, including cases that had been closed internally. Camille received an email from a single mother. "You don't know me, but I was treated the same way at an airport. I kept quiet because I thought I had no evidence. Thanks to you, I know silence is no longer an option." She read them all. Not a single message was missed. Not a single email was deleted. Each message was like a stone placed on the long road she was walking. Jeremiah poured Camille tea that evening as the city lights came on. They sat on the porch, the yellow light gently covering their gray heads. No one talked about victory. No one called out glory. They just looked at each other as if they understood the same thing. We can't choose when history calls our names, but we can choose how we respond. "How about tomorrow?" Camille asked. Jeremiah smiled. "We'll continue tomorrow." A week after the historic hearings in Raleigh, the ripple effect of the Camille and Jeremiah Drake story has gone beyond politics and the law. It has touched the soul of the community. No longer just a hashtag or a video clip. Organizations, churches, schools, and even businesses are responding in tangible ways. The story is no longer told in words, but in actions. At a church in Atlanta, the pastor set aside his prepared sermon and instead showed a video of Camille's testimony. When the screen went black, he said simply, "This woman is not asking for pity. She reminds us that silence in the face of injustice is complicity." At the same time, a group of African American parents held an emergency meeting at a community center in Chicago. The theme was, "Our children need to learn how to defend their dignity, starting with understanding that they have a right to respect." "I never taught my daughter how to respond to discrimination," one parent said, her voice shaking. But Camille made me understand. It's not about fear, but love. Over the course of 10 days, more than 300 letters poured into Camille's official inbox, from veterans, high school students, single mothers, gay people, and immigrants. Each had their own version of silence, and now they were writing to break it. A San Diego nonprofit called Jeremiah. We're planning to open an educational center called Drake Dignity Hall. We're hoping you and your wife will join us for the launch. Jeremiah couldn't say anything right away. He sighed, then laughed. We were just on vacation. Who would have thought it would be a reform program? Camille was no exception. She began accepting invitations to speak at community events, but she didn't talk about herself. She told stories in emails. These seemingly insignificant snippets of life represented millions of unheard sighs. There was a woman who stood in front of the camera, she said during a talk in New Orleans, but thousands of people stood behind her. And that's what made me strong. The response from this community was more than sentiment. It was concrete action. A hotel chain announced a review of its entire guest treatment process. A Southern college made a modern civil rights class mandatory. A group of students started a scholarship named after Angela, the courageous receptionist. Angela, when invited to speak at the scholarship launch, burst into tears at the first sentence. I'm just a receptionist. But because of Camille, I know. Saying the right thing doesn't require a title. It just requires heart. In Brooklyn, a group of young people organized an outdoor movie screening, not for entertainment, but to tell Camille's story in the community's own language, graffiti art, spoken word music, and rap. A song called Stand Still was inspired by Jeremiah's words during the hearing. We don't have to run to survive. Sometimes we just have to stand still and stare at what's wrong. Social media platforms have also changed their response. An Austin tech startup updated a feature that allows users to rate accommodations not just on amenities, but also on cultural respect and inclusiveness. The new rating is called the Drake Index. A 75-year-old woman in Alabama wrote a letter to Camille, handwritten with careful handwriting that seemed to be pasted with commas. I used to think I was too old to do anything. But today, after telling your story to my Bible class, I understand. It's never too late to be a voice. Camille keeps all her letters in a wooden box on her desk. She doesn't read them all at once. She picks one each day, reads it slowly, carefully, to remember, to understand, and to know she's on the right track. A community radio station invited Jeremiah to be a guest on People Who Didn't Seek the Light, but Were Found by the Light. The host asked, "Were you scared?" Jeremiah smiled. "I was scared, but not because of the woman in the uniform. I was scared that if we stayed silent, another family would have to bow their heads, and that fear was bigger than anything else." At the end of the program, he received dozens of messages from listeners. Thank you for not bowing your head for us. More and more places are holding seminars, sharing, and opening classes on dignity in public behavior. The name Camille Drake is no longer an individual. It has become a symbol. Not to honor, but to remind that justice is not something far away. It starts with looking at others and acknowledging their worth. And then, what no one expected, but everyone knew was coming, happened. At the annual meeting of the National Lodging Association, the board president formally announced the implementation of the Drake Code, a document of 7 guiding principles that would provide the foundation for training all hotel employees in equity, racial awareness, and crisis response. Camille wasn't at the meeting. She was at home, making tea for Jeremiah, watering the plants in the yard. But that afternoon, a representative called. They want you to be an honorary advisor for their national training. Camille simply said, I'll do it if it's not just a slogan. The caller was silent for a moment. Then softly, for the first time in 27 years in the industry, I believe they mean it. That evening, Camille played back the video of her testimony. For the first time, she watched not as a witness, but as a mother, a wife, someone who had been silent for too long. She didn't see a 63-year-old woman speaking in public. She saw herself at 16, the girl who had been kicked out of a bookstore for just looking and not buying. "I wish I had stood still," she whispered. Jeremiah stepped in and put his hand on her shoulder. "I stood. It just took a few decades for the world to be quiet enough to listen." Camille smiled, and together they walked out onto the porch, where the moonlight illuminated her silver hair like a testament to seasons of silence. But this night was different, for they were no longer silent. A year after the Raleigh hearings, Camille Drake sat by the living room window, a cup of Earl Grey tea in her hand, looking out at her backyard. Spring had sprung. The lavender was blooming. But that wasn't why she was smiling. A thick envelope sat on the table, postmarked from 3 states. Inside were early copies of the Drake Principles, which had become standard practice in more than 200 hospitality and public service colleges nationwide. Camille said nothing. She just ran her hand over the edge of the paper, as if she were stroking a journal. Jeremiah walked in, holding a newspaper. "They just passed the Equal Access Act," he said. "The official name is the Camille Drake Fair Admissions Act." Camille looked up. There was a moment of silence, as if she were listening to herself. Then she shook her head slightly. "The name doesn't matter as long as people actually practice it. They don't have statues. They don't have museums named after them. But their presence has become an undercurrent in many policies, conversations, leadership decisions, places that once would never have talked about discrimination." On a weekend night TV show, the host asked the audience, "Do you know why all airport employees are now trained to handle situations with equality and no prejudice?" And then he answered himself, "Because a woman refused to bow." That night, an 8-year-old child, brown-skinned, curly-haired, asked his mother, "What if someone thinks wrong about me?" "Stand still," she replied, "and tell the truth, like Camille did." No one knows exactly when that story touched the heart of America, but one thing is certain. It stayed. Not in a storm of anger, but in a quiet aftershock, enough to crack what seemed unshakable. Camille put her hand to her chest, as if feeling her heart beat in time with the beat of the times. "We didn't change the world overnight," she told Jeremiah. "But if we had stayed silent that day, the world wouldn't have changed at all." He nodded, and they sat there, without cheers, without an audience, because a true legacy is when you leave a room, but your presence remains. A reminder. Be kind, because you never know who's standing there silently watching. You just heard a story that sounds like it belongs in a movie, but no, it's true. A black couple, polite, successful, just wanting to enjoy an anniversary vacation, were humiliated in public just because their skin color didn't fit the scene. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't protest in anger, but they didn't bow their heads either. And it was that calmness that toppled a system accustomed to burying wrongdoing behind the pretense of reasonable doubt. Stop for a second and think. If they weren't people with positions, with voices, would they have been heard? Or would they have been escorted out of the hotel, pushed into the shadows like thousands of others who are unrecorded, without cameras, without evidence? We live in a society where belonging is still something you have to prove if you are a minority, where a look can be a judgment, where your peaceful existence becomes a threat in the eyes of others. And that is unacceptable. The story of Camille and Jeremiah is not just a slap in the face to the system, but a mirror, reflecting back to us. Will we choose to stay silent, thinking, "This is not about me"? Or will we be the ones to stand up, even if it is just by taking small actions? The lesson here is not to wait until you have power to speak up. The lesson is kindness, truth, and courage, when held firmly, can bring down an entire structure of injustice. And that starts with you not looking away. If this story makes you angry, like it to let the world know that you do not accept injustice. Leave a comment below. What would you do if you were in a similar situation? Have you ever witnessed discrimination? And most importantly, subscribe so you never miss out on more powerful, real stories like this. We will continue to tell them, to make the voices of those who have been forgotten heard. Camille and Jeremiah did not seek fame. But their journey has empowered millions. Help us spread the word, not with anger, but with awareness. Because justice doesn't start in the courtroom, it starts with you, and the actions you choose to take after hearing this story.